Bonsoir, chers amis. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you tonight at the Czech Centre in Paris at the occasion of a talk that we will dedicate to a great German painter. I believe that the current retrospective at the Fondation Louis Vuitton is the largest ever held for this artist. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome here Mr. René Bloch, who is a film historian collector and who presented one emblematic painting by Gerhard Richter for the first time to the public, Onkel Rudi. This painting belongs to the collections of Lidice Art Collection, represented here by Miloslav Vorlíček, the artistic director of this collection. And this evening is a collaboration between the Fondation Louis Vuitton, Czech Centre, Lidice Art Collection, and also Goethe-Institut that helped us put this evening together. I think it will be a fascinating journey, and through the story of this painting, we will talk history, we will talk paradoxes of what 20th century produced in this small European region. And you will be able to ask questions in the end. The exhibition is still on display, but if you haven't seen it yet, you don't have much time left. So please hurry to the Fondation Louis Vuitton. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I will leave the floor to Miloslav Vorlíček and Mr. René Bloch. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. My name is Miloslav. I'm the curator of the Lidice Art Collection, and I really would like to thank Radka Ondráčková and the whole Czech Centre team for hosting us, the Goethe-Institut for supporting us, obviously, and for Fondation Louis Vuitton, and Suzanne Paget for being here and for cooperating with us. And, you know, as Radka mentioned, the show is on at Fondation until the 2nd March, so if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to do so, because it's much more than about Onkel Rudi, but obviously the artwork is important in history. And the talk today, or the conversation that we will hold here, is kind of mystifyingly called The Hidden History of Gerhard Richter, Onkel Rudi. And I want to note at the start that this is not an art historical conversation. This is a conversation about its provenance, about its history that might be hidden from the public, because the story of Onkel Rudi is obviously well documented. But the part that connects it with Lidice, with René Bloch, is maybe a little less known. And so today we would like to talk about this quite extensively. Many of the information that you hear here today was never heard, because some of it is original research that was just kind of in process, that we have gathered. And obviously you will directly hear from René Bloch in the second half of this evening. If you have any questions throughout the evening, ask. And if you have any question you want to leave till the end, there will be definitely a space for questions. So without further ado, I would first, in my part, introduce you to the living history of the Lidice Art Collection. It is, in this presentation, I call it the silent collection, because there is a direct link, which I will get to why the word silent is there. In our public statement, we are a public solidarity collection, and we were established by British physician Sir Barnet Stross. And the names that you see of the core artworks or artists that we highlight are from 80% thanks to René Bloch. So we are deeply grateful to his effort over the years. Over 96 artworks in our collections are because of René Bloch. However, our collection has over 650 works. Yeah, okay. And I divided this into 7 stages. Don't worry, this is not a 2-hour representation, but I thought it might make sense somehow to frame those parts of the history, to note the history of Lidice Art Collection, how significant is it for that the Onkel Rudi ended in the collection, what was the, kind of the history of the collection, what definitely inspired René Bloch. He will get to his part later and tell you directly, so I will slightly avoid that. But the complicated history of the collection itself, sometimes we say it's like a movie itself. And so the first part is called Void. This is the period from 1942 to 1945. Lidice was, prior to 1942, a quiet Czech village just outside Kladno. It was a miners' village of, in 1942 there were over 500 inhabitants who were, living quite peacefully there. However, after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, the Gestapo incorrectly selected Lidice for liquidation because through to a letter that was attributed to highlight the assassins of Reinhard Heydrich, they not noticed that Lidice is the place that was helping the assassins of Reinhard Heydrich. You have to, obviously, just a quick reminder that Reinhard Heydrich was the 3rd highest Nazi, the architect of Holocaust, and that the assassination by the Czech resistance is the biggest assassination of any Nazi during the Second World War. On the 9th of 9th June and the morning of 10th of June, Gestapo and the Czech police surrounded the village. They murdered all the men. They sent all the women to concentration camps, and they claimed to send the children for education, but in reality they murdered 82 children in the concentration or extermination camp near Chełmno in northern Poland, in the cars with gas. This was the other way how to murder people by the Nazis, with the gas, but not in the gas chambers, but in the cars. And they then went on to destroy the whole village. They didn't just murdered everyone or send them to concentration camp. They actually went on a destruction of the village for over 1 year. They were destroying not just the buildings, but the landscape. We recently worked with Marta Popivoda, who is a artist born in Yugoslavia, who now lives in Berlin, and she met with one German researcher, and he believes, this is not confirmed, so I'm just saying it as a kind of side note, that the Nazis were trying to use eugenics for landscape. They were using eugenics for the race, and they kind of, in this case, he believes that they were trying to erase the race from the ground. So when the surviving women, who were the only adults that survived the massacre, but for 3 men, which were elsewhere, came back after 1945, they did not recognize the landscape. Not only there was no house, they also did not recognize the landscape, because the landscape was completely remodeled, the lake was emptied, it was completely destroyed. So the Nazis were really proud of this, actually, and they put it in all the newsreels across the Reich. However, within 1 week they removed it, because across the globe this was the first acknowledged war crime. People knew there is Holocaust, this was the first kind of officially by them acknowledged war crime, and it created an incredible uproar. And a first wave of solidarity. So, for example, in United States, there was a Lidice committee, which was headed by Theodore Roosevelt, and the members were Albert Einstein, and their goal was to rename 36 villages across the world to be named Lidice, while in Britain, a Lidice Shall Live was founded. It was a movement in Stoke-on-Trent. I don't know if anyone ever of you was in Stoke-on-Trent, but Stoke-on-Trent is like a the most poorest part of Britain until today. It's in Midlands. This is the first place where the Brexit vote was going, so it's very like kind of depressed. And in that time, it was a miners' town, and because in Lidice there were miners living there, they went on to found this movement that was supposed to, whose goal was to raise enough money to rebuild Lidice after the war. So the reason why they used the word shell, which was the name of the movement, is because there was a decree by Hitler which said that the Lidice, the name will be erased from the earth and the village will not be there. And so the shell is in English the opposite, no? So it's like more than must. In any law you have the shell, which is like you have to do that. So this was by defiance the statement that Lidice will live after the war. Obviously, there was a success. We won the war. This is the this is the positive bit. And in 1945, the miners from 1942 to 1945 were able to raise 45,000 pounds, which is equivalent of roughly 2 million pounds today. Just to note, British miners were never rich, so it's an incredible achievement. And because of this money, Lidice was rebuilt. Obviously, the rebuilding next to the original Lidice, the Lidice side where was the old village, stayed as a memento, as a monument to the massacre. And the new Lidice were built right next to it on the land nearby. And between 1947 and 1960, all of it was rebuilt, but first the houses which were built within a couple of years. And the person who was responsible both for the Lidice Shall Live movement, for the Rose Garden, which I will just talk about, and for the collection is Sir Barnet Stross, who was a Labour MP. He was actually councillor in 1942. He was a local councillor in Stoke-on-Trent, and he was a doctor who was actually in the 30s, because there was no free healthcare. He was giving many miners healthcare for free. He was a socialist, and after the war, he became a great friend of Lidice, and he actually was a chair of the Czechoslovak British committee in British Parliament. And in 1955, he founded the Rose Garden, which was original British Rose Garden. It's still in Lidice today. And later, in 1966, he initiated the foundation of Lidice Art Collection, inviting a selected group of artists, which in translation by the Czech Foreign Ministry, and we are on the ground of Czech, at the time was Czechoslovak, they translated it incorrectly, so the close call became an open call, and instead of expected 16 artists, over 150 arrived the first year. So artworks, not artists, obviously. So this is the time which we move to, and we have to understand the period. So 1967 to August 1968. I named this part Art with a Human Face because, this is the time of Prague Spring, which was called Socialism with Human Face. And in my research, I discovered that, for the first time ever, we can say that the creation of Lidice Art Collection was extremely tied up to the Prague Spring. All the people that were involved on the Czech side were very much the reformists, One of them, and this is the first time that we acknowledge his contribution, is Adolf Hofmeister, who was a Czech artist, poet, also a novelist, who actually in 1945 wrote a poem, Lidice, and later he was the chair of the Czechoslovak Union of Artists, which is an organization that when it was founded in 1947, it was the socialist realism union, the one that was forcing the artists to do what the party wanted. However, by 1964, it turned into an organization that was pro-reform. In 1967, it became really interested in international art, and I mean, the art that was not just socialist realism. And in 1967, Adolf Hofmeister invited Czechoslovak artists to donate artworks to the Lidice Art Collection. And in the 1967, as I mentioned, over 150 artworks arrived. The year later, similar number arrived to Lidice. However, in between, on the 22nd October 1967, René Bloch opened Hommage à Lidice in his West Berlin gallery with the list of artists that you have right there. And René Bloch will talk about this more in the following moments. And in '68, obviously, we had the invasion of the Soviets or the Warsaw Pact armies, and because both Hofmeister and Chalupecký, who I will talk about in a second, they were all attached to reform movement. The collection itself was suddenly put into a moment where people didn't like the authorities didn't want it to be public. This is the front page of the newspaper of the Czechoslovak Artists Union from after the invasion, and actually after the invasion there was a note to destroy the donation from René Bloch, and instead of it was obviously Czech is very well known. When there is a rumor, everyone knows about it, so apparently they knew about it. So Jindřich Chalupecký, who actually visited René Bloch in Berlin, and they collaborated on the show of the René Bloch's donation in Prague, saved the artworks and stored them in a place which he claimed no one would look to. I want to now tell you a little bit about the reality, what happened with the collection, because we now have this evidence list which notes that in 1969 they accepted the donation from René Bloch. The numbers were given, you know, the inventory numbers, but there was no interest in showing them. So between 68 and 69, they overcome the idea of destroying the artworks, but they kind of put them in a storage where no one can see them. And they started, which I mean the normalization regime, that's what was called in Czechoslovakia. It was the regime after 1970 or 69, when the government tried to make people forget about the ideas of 68. People were kicked from work. Obviously, the whole union, this is the incredible actually thing, they couldn't reform the union back to what they wanted, so they destroyed it and founded a new union of artists. So basically they just said like, okay, you can't be reformed. And the last issue of that paper I was showing you just before, of the Union of Artists paper, actually is the death of it. They issue the statements of the new union being founded and, you know, kind of close it publicly, very publicly. And the amnesia is their kind of way of forgetting, and literally from 1970 to 89, they tried for people to forget that there was any Lidice Art Collection. So first in 1972, they organized an open call for Czechoslovak artists to donate artworks to the collection. And when the donations were sent, they rejected over 95% and claimed that they were ideologically compromised. And then they staged an exhibition of those selected 20 artworks, which one you can see some of them here. They are actually, we try to now acquire them to have them in our collection because it's a part of the history in a way. And then they store the rest of the collection in Elahozeves chateau, which is the Lobkowitz family chateau that was, which is the aristocracy that was nationalized by the communists in '48, and it had a storage where all of this artwork was stored. And actually, in 1985, when they were renovating Lidice Memorial, they had in the papers you can find that they claim there is no Lidice art collection, and it would be a good idea if someone founded it. So they by 85 forgot something like this exists. So I guess if we went for more years in the totalitarian regime, they would probably get their point of destroying it at one point. However, sometimes changes are not good for some places. So the history of Lidice Art Collection being associated with the reform movement was completely forgotten. Chalupecký dies in 1990. Adolf Hofmeister actually died in 1973. He was lost man. There is like a notes from his friend that basically they destroyed him. They managed to destroy him. However, when the communism ended, or the 1989 revolution took place, Lidice was seen as a symbol of socialism, because the Communist Party took Lidice as a place to celebrate its power. And so the whole area was really kind of, run down. This is on the left, you see, they were trying to build a gallery, not for the collection, for the Victory of Socialism exhibition, which was not finished. In the middle you see the place where our collection is now, which was run down like this by 2000. And on the right you see the memorial site completely, uncleaned. And so the stigma, really followed the whole 90s. And actually, just so you know, this is the state of the Onkel Rudi when it was found. It had the cuts in it. This is the bottom of the painting. And this is a letter from Franta Francois. Actually, this is the letter to Franta Francois from the director of the Central Bohemian Gallery, which was taking care of the collection. Because Franta Francois is a Czech artist who lives in Paris, and he donated his artwork to all the Solidarity collections, and he wanted to donate to Lidice. And this is a letter from 1999 in which he's told, no one cares about the Lidice Art Collection, and actually it's nice that he wants to donate it. They will accept the donation, but there is no home, there is no gallery, there is no, nowhere to store it. And to conclude my talk, just so you have this overview, because I personally think it's important to understand this as a part of why no one kind of knows where it is, but also at the same time, why is it such a kind of, unloved collection in Czech. Because let's be frank, our collection is not famous in Czech. We are very little known. And the reason is, so far as I was explaining, one side is that you have a Solidarity collection in Skopje, who was founded in the similar time, but they built a museum for it, so the nation could give an attachment to it. This was literally just 67 to 69, and then it gone into hiding. And also it has very little amount of Czech art, which is a problem always in Czech. But we try to work with it. So from 2002, we're trying to rediscover the Solidarity. In the last few years, we really focus our work on Solidarity. And working with partners across especially Europe or regions near to us. We focus on working with contemporary artists within our means, and with early career curators from underprivileged backgrounds, and we are preparing publication, and hopefully we will finally renovate the culture house and build a proper gallery within it. So this is the context of Lidice, and if you have any question around this, you can obviously ask me later. I now want to welcome here René Bloch, and I want to give him the floor.
Good evening. Well, we have heard the history of Lidice, and you have heard a little bit about my involvement in supporting this idea. And so I'm quite proud that I can be today here and to talk a little bit from memory. It was mentioned that Sir Bernard Ross had made this open call to artists in the world to spend a work for Lidice, for a planned museum in Lidice, for a living monument in a way. And in springtime of '67, I read this information in a newspaper. And it was only a few days later that the Berlin Festival had announced the theme for the festival in autumn, Berlin als Mittler zwischen Ost und West, Berlin als, was ist Mittler? As a ambassador between East and West, the cultural ambassador between East and West. And somehow in my head this came together, and I thought, why not following this call of Mr. Strauss and make this exhibition during the Berlin Festival? It would fit exactly in the theme of the festival. Well, the idea was born. I spoke with artists. I got a very positive resonance of it. I spoke first with artists that I worked with in the gallery, which were in a way friends, easy to talk with them about such a project. We had done a project, Hommage at Berlin, 2 years before, where I had invited artists to make a work related to the situation in Berlin, and that was a quite interesting exhibition. So we were following, in a way, this with a homage à Lidice. I invited more artists than I worked in the gallery. I opened this. There were a number of artists which were, in a way, supporters of the gallery project. They were friends and so on. Without that, I worked so directly with them. But in a way, I had this idea, I think, as it was a curated exhibition, that I think that was very important. I felt already having a gallery more as a curator than as a dealer, never as a dealer, but curator. It was a curated exhibition. I thought a kind of what could be an ideal exhibition if I would be director of an institution, what I would collect and so on. So it was a bit in this idea. cultural politisch scene. No museum in Germany had a collection like this. I mean, has a collection involved where those artists were involved. I think in '67 there was a Richter work in 2 museums, one small work in Krefeld, and I think the other one was in another city, Ruhrgebiet in Bochum. And there were a few works of Günter Uecker. He was very famous at the time already, Group Zero, in some of the collections, but none of the others, non-Beuys and non-Polke and non-Fostel, in any of the museum collections. So I thought to make this, for me, ideal collection of artists and bring this behind the Iron Curtain. So we make a demonstration of how our art could look, but we make this demonstration also behind the Irish person. So that was very interesting for me conceptually. When the time came closer to the exhibition, I thought about that this should be documented in the catalogue, but of course a small gallery, I did not have the money to produce a catalogue. So I informed a circle of friends of the gallery and asked them if they would give a little support for a catalogue. And that was quite successful too. There were about 40 responses, and they gave between 50 and 100 marks. So we had much more than to produce a catalogue. We also could produce, I think, a good poster at that time. And this is the catalogue, the old catalogue, the first, probably the first Lidice catalogue. I would, yeah. I would like to go with you through this catalogue so we can see all the works in alphabetic, in this case, alphabetic order. But I did not invite someone to write a text as usual, the catalogue. But there was a very interesting letter by Alvermann, the artist Alvermann invited. And this letter, I think, says a lot about the situation, the political situation and the art situation. Please do not forget we speak about 67. You all remember the years 68 and 69, which also have been very heavy in Berlin. And this letter of Alvermann, instead of a foreword in the catalogue, I would like to read it to you. To show about the spirit of the time and the thinking and the aggression that, especially in his work, might be appear. This was the contribution of Alvermann to the show. Dear René Bloch, there may be some controversy because I chose this particular monstrosity as a gift for this particular city, as an art exceptionally thoughtful gift. I don't believe in heroic monuments for the victims of such crimes. this also explains the other somewhat disconcerting aspect of my contribution. It is not the victims who are being celebrated here, but the executors who are being denounced. If the victims of yesterday are not to have died in vain, it can only be their and in our very own interest to denounce the murders of today. An illusion about the brutality and method of terror used by those in power today illustrates how well we have come to terms with this past, a coming to terms that consisted mainly of sorrowfully repressing the suffering of the victims and the causes that made them victims and those who murdered them. And then to this title of the object. We will not allow our murderers present, once it has become the past, to be dealt with as passively as our fathers and their comrades have dealt with their for 20 years. We will remember the names of those who are at work today, waiting for Nuremberg 2 is not quite right. The trial is taking place today in the Third World in Brooklyn. It will also affect us. So I think this gives a very strong statement about some of the political thoughts behind this participation in this exhibition. I have to go back to the boys. Yes. Thank you. Mm-hmm. The participation of boys. I have to say some artists made special works. Some artists choose special existing works. This work of Beuys is one of those. And one artist gave just a work as solidarity. Capi Bremer, for instance, he made this work. And I think if you see the motives of this work, it is not easy to give such a work to a place like Lidice at that time with our past. But at the same time, remember, there was resistance, and as stamps are political symbols, stamps always stamps in each country is political propaganda. So therefore, these kind of stamps have been produced in the Third Reich. But resistance makes that you can have your finger in color and just put a little bit of, to make the face not looking so nice. And the first stamps after the war, which were such overstamped by these black rasters to show. There have not been new stamps already, but the overstamped stamps were kind of resistant. This political work by Höke. It's very easy to understand. It's a quite big object that he has produced. A very small work by Jörg Ebendorf. Ebendorf was the youngest artist who participated. He was still student with Beuys at the time when I had asked him, but he made already very interesting performances, political performances. A landscape by Koberling, painting by Konrad Luck. Päffken, this is an object with a curtain. One could close the curtain. It shows this wounded child. Palermo. A double portrait of Polke. We never found out who these persons really are. That was a secret, and he left it as a secret. Chris Reinecke, she was a partner of Immendorf, and those both made performances. They called themselves Lidl Group. Then we come to Gerhard Richter. This work was existing. It is from 65, 2 years older. And when Richter gave it, when it did not have this political Aufladung as it has in our days. There is a lot of story, probably you come to that also later, story behind and around this painting, around the relation that Richter could have, or the Richter family, to the Third Reich. It comes up in many essays now, in Germany especially. So I would say it was not real a political painting at the time. It was his Onkel Rudi as an uniform, but it was Onkel Rudi. And now it is, it got a very now it's a very political painting, very interesting in the oeuvre of Richter political painting. Dieter Roth, Gerhard Rühm. Interesting of this is a small montage of Gerhard Rühm, and at that time we could not make quality photographs that really shows the different levels. It has these Ausrufzeichen, this sign you use sometimes in our language, if you call. And this is cut out and it is glued on a side, and then he used the paper showing some war photographs in these papers, if possible from the Third Reich, from the war that he found in paper. So this little montage has 3 levels in paper, and we could not photograph. So it was decided we make about 300 of these montages, and each catalogue will have one original montage instead of a reproduction. Günter Uecker's work is usually in white color, so this was the most change he probably could do. Then Wolf Forstel made a new work for the exhibition. It consists of two works, an older work, which we see on the wall, and on this older work hanging a bag, and the bag has a portrait of Heydrich, and also hanging two kind of children shoes from this. So this he added for the Lidice. An object by Stefan Wewerker, a painting by Lambert Maria Wintersberger. So this was the collection, this 21 works. Now, this is one thing, to put this exhibition together, and with the idea to give it to Lidice. But how? How should one do this? That was the question, the very main question at a certain moment. I had no contact to at that time Czechoslovakia. How can we, as a small private gallery, give this work, bring it to another country? To whom to give it? That was one of the main questions, knowing nobody. The work is here, the collection, and it should go, but how? And then it was, of course, quite a lot written in the press about this, positive and also negative, because there was also in Germany a lot of criticism that you cannot give these works to a place like Lidice. And there was a journalist from Prague. She came to Berlin. She saw the exhibition and she was very impressed about it and about this gesture. And she, when she was back, she made contact with Kalupetsky. Kalupetsky was director of Smala Gallery. The Smala Gallery was a gallery that was kind of artist association gallery. Of course, there were no private galleries in Prague at that time. And Kalupetsky contacted me and said he would be interested in showing the Lidice show in Spala Gallery. And then Forstel, Capibremer, and me decided we will drive to Prague. We will visit Kalupetsky and speak with him and see the gallery space, etc. And there was a very productive, friendly contact. And it was clear he would like to show the exhibition. That was in November '67. But then, after some while, we got messages that it would be very difficult and there is a lot of problem and the government does not allow to show this exhibition. And also we heard that East Germany had protested against this exhibition because as Mr. Vorlíček has mentioned before, there came a lot of paintings to Lidice with this call, also special from socialistic brother countries at that time. And those gifts were, of course, organized by the parties, and there was no problem that they were brought to Lidice, but others in West Germany, there was no organization, no artist would have known to whom give the painting. In principle, it's the same country, same problem that we later had with the exhibition. So East Germany protested against this special showing of gifts that came from the West, and also they protested that there were West German and West Berlin artists together in one exhibition because there were different political units in their meaning. However, it took until July of '68 before it was clear the exhibition could be shown. And there was massive protest against these governmental decisions from the Artists Association of Czechoslovakia. They wished to have this exhibition, and so with many, you probably know more about all this process. At the end, there was green light. So I could put all the works in a car and then drove. I remember at that time in '68 there was Documenta in Kassel that I made a stop in Kassel and looked at Documenta, and we parked all the works overnight in front of the Fridericianum. That was possible at that time. In the Documenta were only two artists, Uecker and Beuys, from our collection in the car. And I remember passing the Czech border. I showed my passport. I had organized some official papers from the Czech Militärmission in Berlin that these are works as a gift for the Lidice. And I showed my passport and they said, okay, drive. And I drive 2 kilometers, and then I said, well, they have not checked what I have in the car. What will I have for a problem if they have police control or something? I have no stamps, nothing. So I went back to the border and said, I have a lot of artwork in the car that's for ladies. They said, well, yes, go. Just to show about the openness in that time in Czechoslovakia, what we mentioned as the Prager Frühling, the springtime of Prague, and one could feel it. It was such a fantastic atmosphere in Prague, in the city. So the exhibition was well accepted, as far I could see in the opening. There was a delegation from Lidice, a number of the women who had survived came. We had some friendly words. Probably they could not understand the work and probably could not see any relation to what happened in history to the village with these works, but it was there, it was accepted. And then after a few weeks, there was the occupation, the second occupation by the Soviets. And I heard from Kalupetsky in a letter that the works are brought somewhere and they are in security. And that was the last I heard, because after this, there were no connections more to Prague. Many of the friends had left Czechoslovakia to the west, and we had no contact to other people. So we didn't know for many years about this. And I must say, for my shame, that we, in a way, forgot about it. It was a history, it was done, and there was no care anymore, and we couldn't accept, and that is interesting. In '97, there was a large exhibition planned in Berlin with the title Deutschlandbilder, and the concept of this exhibition was to reconstruct as good as possible a few exhibitions that had happened in East Germany, in West Germany. And the curator of this exhibition was very much interested to make a reconstruction of this small exhibition from 67 in West Berlin. And then we started, and he had good contacts to Prague. He started to find out where this exhibition could be. Not many people in Prague know about, but at the end, he discovered that it was in this castle, and we both went there, and we went to the basement of the castle, and we found all the works unpacked for 30 years. There was a little bit damage on the Graupner work and a little bit damage on the Kobeling work, but the artists could restore themselves. So in fact, all the works were unpacked but in perfect condition. So they came to Berlin, and that was the first time I saw them again. This was 30 years, 67, 97. And the time had changed. You know, the German unification had happened in the beginning of 90s. I thought I should make a second call to German artists. This time I can call East German artists, West German artists. And there was, after 30 years, a new generation. And again, we had a very positive resonance. We got this time even more. We got 33 artists participating, and also different from the first selection. You have realized it was only men. There was one woman student, friend of Immendorf, but it was only male artists. And in the second call, we have even a majority of women artists, because there was this very strong generation growing up from Katharina Fritsch, Rosemarie Trockel, Astrid Gröting, Katharina Sieverding, just to mention a few. So this was the second call, and this was then officially brought to Prague, and we had an official exhibition. This was this time called Pro Lidice, and it had both collections together, those from 67 and the new collection. And it was still not officially given as a present, but somehow it was clear it would be, and it would stay. In the Lidice Museum was not existing; it was not built. So the promise from that side has not been fulfilled, and. But it stayed in Prague. It was then shown, some works of it in the National Gallery of Modern Art in Prague. And it was very interesting at that time was an old friend, the artist Milan Knizak. He was general director of the museums in Prague. And with his help, we could, during the years, support this idea of changing this cultural place into a museum in Lidice. So at one point, the work came to Lidice, and they had their own place together with many others. Gift and. It's now, so I finish my little talk in good hands.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to hear you talk about this. Just for the audience to note, I'm always amazed to learn or know that you were 25 years old when the Hommage à Lidice was organized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were 23 when the Hommage à Berlin took place.
Yeah,
so
one can only do such things if one has no experience about it.
And I'm also very glad you say that about boys, because it's really, the people come to Lidice often now and they're like, oh, you have these masters and blah blah. But in reality, Lidice Art Collection is a collection of early career and emerging artists. It's a radical collection with a very complicated history, but it has from many pathways artists that are in this way. And one of the things I wanted just to note, because you mentioned it with this Czech journalist, there was actually this show in Prague of German art organized by Dresden Stadtliche in '67, and it had Richter, it had many of the artists that thanks to René Bloch we have in Lidice, and there was clear excitement about these artists in Prague. So I guess that might have been also the connection for this journalist. I don't know now, but I'm only guessing. Before I get the floor to the questions from the audience, I really wanted you to continue for one more slide to tell us a little bit about. You have one more slide there, which I think is really important for the audience.
Yeah, I forgot.
Could you tell us more?
There
is the slide. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I? Yes.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of the story. This car was my gallery car. I bought it very cheap from a construction company. It was quite old at that time, but it was still good for a gallery for transporting artists and artworks. So the complete collection, first collection, Lidice fit into the car, and that is the car which I brought the collection to Lidice in '68. It was 1 year later when the car was wirklich almost breaking down, and I had a performance with boys in Berlin, and afterwards we drove a little bit through Berlin, and I used this good moment and said, boys, this car has to go to we call Autofriedhof, to a place where old cars are giving. But this car, I love this car so much because of the bringing artworks and transporting artists, and I really would not like to give this Schicksal to the car. Can you do something maybe from it? And he said, yeah, maybe. And it was then a few months later when he called me and said, I have an idea. And the idea that he had was this artwork, that you have 24 sledges jumping out of the car, the sledge as the first vehicle in man's history, even no wheels, just sliding. And so, however, he made this wonderful artwork, and now this bus is in the collection of the museum in Kassel, and the installation is been in Kassel. So this bus who traveled to Lidice is still visible as an artwork.
And it's in the place where you stayed for one night with the artworks of Lidice, for Lidice. Maybe one question I have definitely, and is this, because you obviously talk about the 67, and we often talk about in Lidice when I give the tour, or when any of my predecessors gave the guided tour, about understanding the period in Germany, because it's the period of the sons and daughters discovering the guilts of their parents, and in the perception of Richter's Onkel Rudi, there is this, you said that now we know so much more political, but actually when I talk with some people who went to the show in Prague, which for everyone I want to know, that the show, which I don't know if you talk a bit Chalupecky about this, but the show, because it was so many times forbidden, it was called the Western German and Western Berlin avant-garde to Lidice. So it wasn't even called homage, it was actually even more to the to authorities to highlight that this is the avant-garde from the Western Berlin and Germany. And the people who went there, I had two visitors about a year ago, and they said that they could not understand in 1968 a painting of a Wehrmacht officer in the center of Prague, because for them it was too close. So what was the perception of this work at the time, and how, maybe if you know, tell more about your dialogue with Richter about his donation, if you had one.
No special, no. No, it was very, very, in effect, without any interpretation and talking about the contents. I remember when I visited in his studio, there were few paintings, and among these few paintings was this painting, and then after a while he said, "This I would like to give." And I said, "Thank you very much, it's wonderful." But we never talked about all this Onkel Rudi and what is behind it, the family history that minds behind all these paintings. That was not important in this moment, and we have never spoken about, we have never discussed it.
Mm-hmm. We have a question, yeah. Do we have the microphone? One sec.
It was very interesting, and thank you very much to you both. Just to make clear the reaction or what Gerhard Richter told you when he proposed you Onkel Rudi. For him it was very simple and was the work he had chosen, but was he aware of the special history of Lidice and and in particular what you said at the beginning, the fact that Reinhard Heydrich was killed by somebody coming from the city, or they were supposing that the murderers came from Lidice, and so was it part of the choice? Because for Wolf Vostel, it's evident that Heydrich is addressed, but for Richter, was it clear for him?
No, it was, as you say, with Vostel was very clear. He, with Bremer was also very clear to use the stamps, and I was more afraid about this work of the reception in Lidice than about Richter's work. I never was afraid. It was Onkel Rudi. Yeah. And it was a secret of Onkel Rudi. It could be a good guy, it could be not such a good guy. And that is a problem. that my generation had in Germany with a history, with our fathers and uncles. I have in my family also 3 Onkel Rudis. In a way, that means young men from that time, they made military service, and I know them only as good friendly uncles. This is such problem, but a general problem, what is with a painting like this, and that is, I think, also that makes it so interesting in a way, because it's not so clear as for Stel or Bremer. It is, yeah, even unclear. But as we know now, we have to see Onkel Rudi in connection with Tante Marianne, which hangs in the exhibition next to it, or with another painting, Heydrich, which somehow deal with the past in a private way. I think looking at the exhibition and going through it, there are other paintings, a few other paintings which are more clear, which he gives a more clear statement, which I would say is the RAF paintings, the Baader-Meinhof cyclus, which is there, where he gives a very strong statement of our times, of what we have experienced. We have not experienced World War II. Even Richter is 10 years older than me, has not experienced active, only as a child. But Baader-Meinhof we have somehow experienced, and the other cycle, the Birkenau paintings, which show also very clear the inner conflict he has with the past, that at the end he could not show what is, he had to overpaint it, not neutral it. So I mean, I'm not interpret. I'm very I probably say it very simply, but I see the difference between Onkel Rudi and the Baader-Meinhof circle or the Birkenau paintings. I see very clear and strong.
And I want to say, just to note, in Lidice, this is probably the most controversial painting. When they opened the gallery in 2003, the surviving Lidice women were very angry about it, or if I may say it more, do I say it right? I hope. And they had to close the gallery to rehang the show and to put explanation next to the artwork. So there is a really complicated, like the Nuremberg, waiting for Nuremberg 2, that's controversial, but it kind of was displayed many times. But this was, the Rudi was really particularly disliked. And actually even today when we post, for example on Facebook, something about Onkel Rudi, some of the survivors would write like, my mother would not come to the gallery since it was displayed there, and like the son of the survivor. So the history with Lidice itself is really complicated, and there's one thing in the catalog for the Prague show which I think is really nicely wrote, because they were maybe aware of this issue, maybe, I don't know, it just sounds like this. They are like, we hope that this honest gesture of love is accepted with understanding. We hope that the truth which is held within these artworks and that the artists try to say will meet with the truth of the people of Lidice, who hope that overcoming the crime and the destruction they can build new, better, and more understanding life. So that's kind of the hope that was expressed by the Czech part in 1968.